Afternoon shopping at Westfield Century City Mall was supposed to be a celebration, not the backdrop for a brutal assault. When Bradley's fingers closed violently around her throat, cutting off her oxygen, she thought her life was over. She had no idea the most feared man in the city was standing just 30 feet away watching her every move. Morgan Hayes had finally learned how to breathe again. It had been exactly 8 months and 12 days since the judge struck the gavel, legally severing her from the walking nightmare that was Bradley Jenkins. 8 months of waking up in a tiny, cramped apartment in the San Fernando Valley instead of the sprawling suburban house that had served as her personal prison. 8 months of slowly, painstakingly piecing together a shattered self-esteem. Morgan was a fat woman. It was a physical reality she had spent the better part of her 29 years apologizing for, mostly because society demanded it, but heavily because Bradley had weaponized it against her. Throughout their 5-year marriage, her body had been his favorite punchline, his justification for his affairs, and the reason he claimed no one else would ever want her. He had convinced her that she was a burden, a heavy, unlovable thing that should be grateful for his cruel scraps of affection. But today Morgan was defying him. Today she was shopping at the Westfield Mall, navigating the weekend crowds with her head held high. She had just landed a promotion as a senior financial analyst at a reputable logistics firm, and she was buying a dress to celebrate. Not a baggy black tunic meant to hide her curves, but a tailored emerald green wrap dress that hugged her heavy breasts, accentuated her waist, and flowed beautifully over her wide hips and thick thighs. She caught her reflection in the glass storefront of a high-end boutique. The woman staring back had soft, flushed cheeks, cascading dark brown hair, and a hesitant but genuine smile. For the first time in a decade, she felt beautiful. What Morgan didn't know was that she wasn't the only one who thought so. 3 stories up, seated at a private table on the terrace of Il Cielo, an exclusive Italian restaurant he quietly owned, Casey Moretti was watching her. Casey was not a man who casually people-watched. As the ruthless, undisputed head of the Moretti Syndicate, a sprawling criminal empire disguised as a legitimate international shipping conglomerate, his time was measured in millions of dollars and human lives. He was 34, built like a heavyweight boxer, with eyes the color of cracked asphalt, and a reputation that made hardened criminals cross the street. Yet for the past 6 months, his entire world had covertly revolved around Morgan Hayes. Their paths had crossed by pure accident. Morgan's logistics firm had unwittingly been auditing a shell company tied to Casey's rivals. When a hit was put out on the accounting team to cover the trail, Casey's men had intercepted it to seize leverage. Casey had personally reviewed the files, fully intending to liquidate everyone involved. But then he saw her security footage. He watched this soft, beautiful, terrified woman stay late every night, rubbing her tired eyes, quietly eating a pastry at her desk, utterly unaware of the blood-soaked underworld brushing against her spreadsheets. He had started having her watched to ensure she wasn't a threat, but surveillance quickly twisted into an obsession. He learned about Bradley. He read the police reports Morgan had been too terrified to file, buried by Bradley's wealthy, well-connected family. He learned how her ex-husband had broken her down. Casey, a man who dealt in violence every single day, found himself violently enraged by the idea of anyone laying a hand on Morgan. "Boss!" A low voice interrupted Casey's thoughts. It was Leo, his heavily scarred enforcer, standing at a respectful distance. "She just bought the green dress." Casey's lips twitched into a faint, dangerous smile, his eyes never leaving the distant figure of Morgan on the ground floor. "Good. It suits her. Have Vincent pull the car around to the valet. She'll be leaving soon, and I want to ensure she gets home safely." "Yes, sir." Leo hesitated, tapping his earpiece. "Boss, We have a complication. West entrance. Bradley Jenkins just walked into the mall. Casey's jaw clenched so hard, a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. The temperature on the sunlit terrace seemed to instantly drop. What is that piece of filth doing here? Looks like he tracked her phone, or maybe someone tipped him off. Our intel says he's in deep with the Russian books. Over 200 grand in debt. He's been trying to corner her for weeks, to force her to sign over the equity from the divorce settlement he hid. Casey stood up, tossing a $100 bill onto the table. His tailored charcoal suit shifted over broad, heavily muscled shoulders. Clear the immediate sector. Block the security cameras in the south corridor. If he gets within 10 feet of her, I want him bleeding. You want us to handle it, boss? No. Casey said, his voice a lethal, quiet rasp. I'm going down there. Down on the first floor, Morgan clutched her shopping bag, a victorious thrill humming in her veins. She decided to take the quieter service corridor toward the parking garage, hoping to avoid the congested main exits. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with blank white walls and heavy maintenance doors. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard the footsteps. Heavy, hurried, familiar. A cold spike of adrenaline pierced her spine. Her body recognized the rhythm of that walk before her conscious mind did. She froze her breath, catching in her throat, and turned around. Bradley. He looked worse than she remembered. His normally perfectly styled blonde hair was greasy and unkempt, his designer polo shirt wrinkled. There were dark bags under his eyes, but it was the frantic, manic rage in his expression that made Morgan's blood run cold. "Did you really think you could just block my number pen?" Bradley sneered, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. "Bradley!" She gasped instinctively, taking a step back until her shoulders hit the cold plaster of the wall. "How did you find me? You aren't supposed to be anywhere near me. I have a restraining order." "A piece of paper." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the empty hall. "You think a piece of paper stops me? You owe me, you fat cow. I'm losing the house because of the legal fees from the divorce you dragged out. You hid assets the judge ordered." "Shut up!" Bradley snapped, lunging forward. He slammed his hand against the wall right next to her head, trapping her. Morgan flinched, pulling her shopping bag to her chest like a shield. "Look at you." Bradley mocked, his eyes raking over her body with absolute disgust. "Buying nice clothes, trying to play dress-up. Who are you trying to impress, Penn? Nobody wants a pathetic heavy pig like you. You're nothing without me. Now you're going to call your bank, and you're going to transfer the 60 grand you got from the joint account back to me. Today." "No," Morgan said. Her voice trembled, but a spark of the new fire she had cultivated over the last 8 months flared to life. "That money is mine. You stole years of my life. You are not taking my future. Get away from me, Bradley." Bradley's eyes widened in shock. Morgan had never spoken to him like that. Not once in 5 years. The shock quickly mutated into a blinding, violent fury. "You stupid bitch!" he hissed. Before Morgan could scream, Bradley dropped his arm and lunged. His large hands shot out his fingers, wrapping violently around her thick, soft throat. The impact forced a strangled gasp from Morgan's lips as Bradley slammed her hard against the wall. The back of her skull cracked against the drywall, sending a blinding flash of white light across her vision. "You think you can say no to me?" Bradley spat, spittle hitting her cheek. His thumbs dug into her windpipe, applying a crushing, agonizing pressure. "You think you're people now? I made you. I tolerated you." Panic primal and absolute exploded inside Morgan. She dropped her shopping bag, the beautiful green dress spilling onto the dirty linoleum floor, and clawed at Bradley's hands. Her manicured nails dug into his wrists, drawing blood, but the pain only seemed to enrage him further. He squeezed tighter. Her lungs burned. The edges of her vision began to blur into a fuzzy, terrifying grey. She kicked out her flats, slipping uselessly against his shins. She was larger than him, heavier, but the angle and the sheer adrenaline-fueled surprise of the attack had given him absolute leverage. She was suffocating. The Westfield Mall, the bright afternoon, her new promotion. It was all fading into the violent reality of the man who had always promised he would destroy her. "I'm going to die here," she thought, a tear slipping down her flushed cheek. Right by the food court. And then the air in the corridor changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a shift in atmospheric pressure, a sudden suffocating wave of pure, concentrated menace that rolled down the hallway. "You have exactly 2 seconds to remove your hands from her," a voice stated. It wasn't a shout. It was barely above a conversational volume. But it was a voice carved from ice and violence. It possessed a terrifying, absolute authority that vibrated in the marrow of Morgan's bones. Bradley froze his grip, loosening, just a fraction enough for Morgan to suck in a ragged, desperate lungful of air. He turned his head, irritated at the interruption. "Back off, buddy. This is private business with my why." Bradley never finished his sentence. From her blurred peripheral vision, Morgan saw a blur of charcoal wool and a flash of a heavy silver watch. Casey Moretti didn't punch Bradley. Punching was for bar brawls. Casey stepped into Bradley's space with lethal precision, his massive hand shooting out to grip Bradley's forearm. With a sickening wet crack that echoed down the hallway like a gunshot, Casey snapped Bradley's arm at the elbow, bending it backward in a direction nature never intended. Bradley shrieked a high, reedy sound of absolute agony. He stumbled back, releasing Morgan completely. She collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the floor, coughing violently and clutching her bruised throat. Casey didn't stop. As Bradley staggered, howling and cradling his ruined arm, Casey stepped forward and delivered a devastating, calculated kick to the side of Bradley's knee. Another pop sounded, and Bradley crashed to the floor, writhing and sobbing in a puddle of his own sudden weakness. Morgan watched in stunned, gasping terror. The man standing over her ex-husband was a giant. He radiated wealth and danger in equal measure. His tailored suit jacket was unbuttoned, revealing a broad chest, and his dark hair was perfectly styled, unaffected by the extreme violence he had just committed. Bradley, weeping on the floor, looked up at the man. "Are you crazy? I'll call the cops. I'll have you arrested. Do you know who I am?" Casey slowly adjusted his cuffs, his dark eyes looking down at Bradley with the detached disgust one might reserve for a squashed cockroach. "I know exactly who you are." "Bradley Jenkins," Casey said, his Italian accent bleeding through the silk of his perfect English. "You are a cowardly piece of shit who owes Victor Volkov $240,000, a debt that as of 10 minutes ago I have purchased." Bradley's sobbing hitched. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of grey. "Well, what? Who are you?" Casey ignored him. He turned his back on the broken man on the floor, dismissing him entirely, and knelt in front of Morgan. The transition was staggering. The ruthless monster vanished, replaced by a man whose dark eyes softened with such profound, agonizing tenderness that Morgan momentarily forgot to breathe. "Morgan!" Casey whispered his voice, a deep, soothing rumble. He reached out his massive, calloused hands, hovering just inches from her skin, fiercely respecting her boundaries. "Are you all right? May I touch you?" Morgan was trembling, violently, tears streaming down her face. She looked at his large hands, then up at his impossibly handsome, commanding face. She didn't know this man yet, Looking into his eyes, she felt an inexplicable, overwhelming sense of safety. She gave a tiny, jerky nod. Casey gently cupped her face. His thumbs, surprisingly soft, wiped the tears from her flushed, soft cheeks. His gaze dropped to her throat, where the angry red marks of Bradley's fingers were already beginning to bruise purple. A flash of pure, murderous rage crossed Casey's eyes before he carefully masked it. "I am so sorry I didn't reach you faster, Mia Bella," he murmured, his thumb gently stroking her jawline. "He will never ever be within 100 miles of you again. I swear it on my life." "Who?" Morgan croaked, her vocal cords burning. "Who are you?" "My name is Casey. Casey Moretti." He gently helped her to her feet, his arm wrapping securely around her thick waist, treating her heavy body as if she were made of priceless spun glass. "And you, Morgan Hayes, have been mine to protect for a very long time." Before Morgan could process the absolute madness of that statement, two men in dark suits materialized at the end of the hallway. They approached silently, their eyes dead and professional, as they looked at the whimpering Bradley on the floor. "Mr. Moretti," the taller one, Vincent, said, "the car is ready. Shall we clean up the trash?" Casey kept Morgan tucked firmly against his side, shielded from the sight of her abuser. "Take him to the warehouse by the docks," Casey commanded, his voice returning to that terrifying, emotionless void. "Do not let him pass out. I want him fully conscious when I return to explain the consequences of touching what belongs to me." Morgan's eyes widened, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked up at Casey, realizing with a sudden, dizzying clarity that she hadn't just been saved by a good Samaritan. She had just been claimed by a king of the underworld. The world beyond the tinted windows of the armored Maybach felt entirely detached from reality. Morgan sat frozen against the plush leather seats, her mind struggling to process the seismic shift her life had just undergone. The glittering facade of the Westfield Century City Mall disappeared into the distance, replaced by the winding, sun-drenched curves of Mulholland Drive. Beside her sat Casey Moretti, a man who had casually shattered her ex-husband's arm before treating her like a fragile, revered deity. He had not spoken since they entered the vehicle, sensing her overwhelming shock. Instead, he simply sat near her, his broad shoulders radiating a solid, anchoring heat. His large hand rested between them on the armrest palm, up an open, silent invitation that she was free to accept or ignore. Morgan, whose thick thighs pressed nervously against each other beneath her ruined shopping experience, found her eyes repeatedly drawn to that hand. It was the hand of a killer. It was also the first hand that had truly protected her in over a decade. "You are shaking, Morgan," Casey finally said, his voice a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the luxurious cabin. He turned his head, his dark, heavy-lidded eyes studying her with intense focus. "Are you in pain? I have a private medical team waiting at the estate. They will examine your throat the moment we arrive." I don't understand," Morgan whispered, her voice still raspy from the assault. She instinctively reached up her soft, plump fingers, brushing the tender, darkening bruises on her neck. "Why me? Why were you watching me? You run a syndicate. You are a Mafia boss." Casey did not flinch at the accusation. He did not offer empty platitudes or deny the dark reality of his existence. He shifted, turning his massive frame fully toward her. "I am exactly what you think I am," Casey stated calmly, his Italian accent wrapping around the harsh truth. "I control the ports from San Diego to Seattle. I traffic in commodities that would make a sane person weep, and I have eliminated anyone who stood in the way of my family's prosperity. But my world is governed by strict rules, Morgan. By order. What your ex-husband did to you, what he has been doing to you for 5 years, is chaos. It is a fundamental crime against nature to break down a woman as magnificent as you. Morgan let out a harsh, bitter laugh, the sound scraping against her raw vocal cords. Magnificent, please, Mr. Moretti. You don't have to flatter me. I know what I am. Bradley made sure I knew every single day. I am fat. I am heavy. I am not the kind of woman a man like you looks at. The temperature in the car seemed to plummet instantly. Casey's jaw locked, a terrifying tempest brewing in his dark eyes. For a split second, Morgan feared she had angered him, but then his hand moved. He didn't grab her. He gently, deliberately placed his large palm over her knee, his thumb stroking the curve of her thick thigh through the fabric of her skirt. Do not ever repeat the poison that worthless worm poured into your ears. Casey growled, his voice vibrating with a dangerous protective possessiveness. Bradley Jenkins is a weak, pathetic boy who was terrified of a woman who took up space. He wanted a ghost he could control, not a goddess who could overshadow him. He leaned closer, the scent of expensive cedar and faint gunpowder enveloping her senses. Look at yourself, Morgan. You are soft. You are abundant. You are built like the classical statues of Rome, designed to be worshipped, cherished, and adorned in gold. Your curves are a privilege to witness. The fact that he made you feel ashamed of your body is a crime I plan to punish him for extensively. Tears welled in Morgan's eyes, hot and overwhelming. No one had ever spoken about her body like this. The societal conditioning, the endless diets, the cruel remarks from Bradley, it all momentarily shattered against the undeniable burning sincerity in Casey's gaze. He looked at her, not with pity, but with a ravenous, reverent hunger. The Maybach slowed, pulling through a set of massive wrought-iron gates that opened into a sprawling, secluded estate nestled high in the Hollywood Hills. The mansion was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all glass, dark steel, and infinity pools that overlooked the sprawling expanse of Los Angeles below. It was a fortress disguised as a paradise. Once inside, the medical team attended to her with utmost discretion, applying cooling salves to her neck and ensuring there was no structural damage to her windpipe. Afterward, she was led to a massive guest suite featuring a marble bathtub and clothes in her exact correct size. As she slipped into a soft, luxurious silk robe that draped beautifully over her wide hips and heavy breasts, a knock sounded at the door. Casey entered, holding a thick manila folder. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie, the sleeves of his crisp white shirt rolled up to reveal intricate tattoos sprawling across his muscular forearms. "May I sit?" he asked, pointing to the velvet armchair opposite the sofa where she rested. Morgan nodded. Casey opened the folder, his expression shifting back to the calculating, ruthless boss of the Moretti Syndicate. "I promised you transparency, Morgan. Our meeting was not initially destined by fate. It was a byproduct of your ex-husband's absolute stupidity." Morgan frowned, pulling the silk robe tighter around her soft curves. "Bradley, what does he have to do with you?" "Bradley is an extreme gambling addict," Casey explained, tossing a stack of bank statements onto the coffee table. "He owes the Volkov Bratva, a Russian syndicate operating in the valley, nearly $250,000. But Bradley is also a coward. When the Russians threatened to break his legs, he promised them a way to clean their money. He set up a complex web of shell companies to launder their cash." Casey paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers with intense gravity. "He routed all of those shell companies through the logistics firm you work for, specifically through the accounts you personally audit. He used your login credentials, which he copied during your marriage." The blood drained from Morgan's face. The room spun slightly as the horrific realization crashed into her. He was framing me. Yes, Casey said coldly. If the FBI or the IRS ever investigated the paper trail would lead directly to Morgan Hayes. Bradley intended to let you take the fall for international money laundering, a federal crime that carries a 20-year sentence. He planned to let you rot in a federal penitentiary while he walked away clean. Bile rose in Morgan's throat. The physical abuse, the emotional torment, the financial ruin, it all paled in comparison to this profound, calculated betrayal. Bradley hadn't just wanted to break her. He had actively plotted to destroy her entire existence to save his own skin. We discovered the anomaly a few months ago. Casey continued, his voice softening as he saw her distress. My men intercepted the Russian data. That is when I first saw you on the security feeds. I watched you working late, completely innocent, completely unaware of the trap closing around you. I intended to just erase the digital trail to hurt the Russians. But then, I couldn't stop watching you. I saw the sadness in your eyes. I dug into your life. I saw what he did to you. Casey stood up, crossing the distance between them. He knelt before the sofa, his massive hands gently taking her trembling, plump hands into his. I have already dismantled the shell companies. Casey stated, his thumbs rubbing soothing circles over her knuckles. The federal trail is completely erased. You are entirely safe from the law. But the Russians were still hunting Bradley for their money, and Bradley came hunting you today to steal your divorce settlement to pay them. He said he was losing the house. Morgan whispered, the puzzle pieces finally snapping together. He has lost everything, Casey corrected, a terrifying dark smirk playing on his lips. Because I bought his debt from the Volkovs this morning. Bradley Jenkins does not owe the Russians anymore. He owes me. The silence in the opulent suite was deafening. Morgan stared down at the terrifying, magnificent man kneeling before her. Casey Moretti held the power of life and death in his hands, and he had just weaponized his entire empire to protect her. What are you going to do to him? She asked, her voice steadying. She realized with a dark thrill that surprised her that she didn't feel an ounce of pity for the man who had just tried to strangle her in a mall corridor. That depends entirely on you, Mia Regina, Casey said softly, calling her his queen. He is currently chained to a concrete pillar in one of my shipping warehouses at the port of Long Beach. His arm is severely broken. He is terrified, weeping, and begging for mercy. Casey's eyes darkened, the pupils blowing wide with primal intensity. I can make him disappear. A barrel, some chemicals, and the Pacific Ocean. He will never be found. Or I can hand him over to the authorities with a neatly wrapped package of evidence detailing his embezzlement, his domestic abuse, and his attempts to defraud his own company. He will spend a decade in a maximum security prison. Morgan closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of Casey's cologne. For 5 years, Bradley had made her feel utterly powerless. He had dictated her diet, her clothes, her finances, and her self-worth. Now, in the ultimate twist of fate, the man who had called her a weak, fat pig was literally in chains waiting for her to decide his destiny. She opened her eyes, a new, fierce light burning in them. She was done hiding. She was done shrinking herself to make cruel men comfortable. I don't want him dead, Morgan stated clearly. Death is too quick. It's an easy escape. I want him in prison. I want him to lose his designer clothes, his country club memberships, and his wealthy friends. I want him locked in a tiny cell knowing that the woman he tried to destroy is the one who put him there. A slow, brilliant, genuinely awe-struck smile spread across Casey's face. He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a fervent, worshipful kiss to her knuckles. "As you wish, my brilliant, beautiful girl," Casey murmured against her skin. "I will have my lawyers deliver the evidence to the district attorney anonymously tonight. Bradley Jenkins will be arrested by dawn." He slowly stood up, pulling her up with him. Morgan's soft, heavy body collided gently against his hard, muscular frame. She didn't shrink back. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to take up space, resting her hands flat against his broad chest. "And what happens to me now, Casey?" she asked, looking up into his dark, mesmerizing eyes. "I know too much. I know who you are. I know what you do." Casey's arms wrapped around her thick waist, pulling her flush against him. He buried his face in her dark, cascading hair, inhaling deeply as if she were the only oxygen left in the world. "You stay," he whispered fiercely, his voice vibrating against her collarbone. "You stay here with me. You let me worship every single curve of this gorgeous body. You let me give you the world you were always denied. Run the legitimate side of my shipping empire. Use that brilliant financial mind of yours. Be my partner. Be my queen." Morgan felt a tear slip down her cheek, but this time it was a tear of absolute, overwhelming liberation. She had walked into that mall, a broken, terrified survivor. She was walking out as the empress of a dark, thrilling kingdom, protected by a monster who treated her like a masterpiece. She tilted her head up, meeting his desperate, hungry gaze, and softly, resolutely pressed her lips to his. Did Morgan's revenge and unexpected Mafia romance leave you breathless? If you loved this intense story of taking back power, surviving abuse, and finding a fierce protector, hit that like button. Please do not forget to share this video with fellow drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life inspired romance stories. Drop a comment below, telling us what you thought of Casey's brutal justice. Stay tuned because our next story is even more explosive right now.